Montana Territory, autumn of 1874. The wind carried dust and sorrow across the high plains as 18-year-old Ada Brooks stood barefoot in the dry grass, her arms wrapped tight around her little brother and sister. Their wagon sat half buried in a ditch, the mule long gone, their father colder than the soil behind them. He had taken his last breath 2 nights ago, fever taking him fast. Their mother had been buried in Kansas 4 months before that, just outside Abilene. Now it was just Ada, 13-year-old Eli, and 5-year-old Clara. Alone. Hungry. No money, no meal, no way forward. They were a long way from anything. "I can walk," Eli muttered, his voice hoarse. "We can find a town." Ada shook her head, her hand tightening around his. "We are not walking into the wild with nothing. We wait. Someone has to come along." As if summoned by desperation, hooves echoed up the road. A lone rider crested the ridge, his tall chestnut gelding cutting across the horizon. He rode easy, but alert like someone who had seen enough not to trust the quiet. He stopped when he saw them. Ada squared her shoulders. She did not flinch. She would not beg. But she would not let her siblings starve either. The man dismounted, slow and cautious. He was tall, lean, maybe in his late 20s. His shirt was dusted with trail grit, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and his eyes, clear gray under the brim of a weathered hat, took them in one by one. "You folks in trouble?" His voice was low and calm. "Our father died," Ada said, chin stubborn. "We got no meal. No food. Just us." The man looked toward the wagon, then back at Ada. "I am sorry. That your pa?" She nodded once. He looked at the little ones. Clara clung to Ada's skirt, her cheeks streaked with dirt and dried tears. "I am Zachary Lowell," he said after a pause. "Got a ranch about 7 miles east. You can come with me. You will be safe there." Ada narrowed her eyes. "Why would you do that?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because I would not leave a woman and 2 children to die on the side of the road." Something in his voice made her believe him. Zachary walked to the wagon, used a shovel from his saddlebag to help bury their father. They said nothing as the sun dipped low, but Ada noticed how gently he wrapped the body, how he tipped his hat before covering the grave. He did not speak over it, but the silence he gave seemed like respect. They rode double on his horse, Ada behind him, Eli holding Clara on his lap. The ride was long, cold, and silent, but when the lights of the ranch house came into view, Clara stirred and whispered, "Is that home?" Zachary did not answer, but he slowed the gelding, let the children take it in the wide porch, the barn beyond, a corral to the side. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, the house was clean and warm. Zachary gave them the guest room, set out blankets, lit a lamp. "Food's cooking," he said. "You can wash up first." Ada helped Clara into the basin, scrubbed the dust from her cheeks. Eli sat at the table, eyes darting, unsure of the kindness. "You live alone?" Ada asked Zachary when she joined him near the stove. "Since my brother died. Been 4 years. Just me and the land now." She studied him, the quiet strength in his hands, the way he moved without noise, as if he had grown up making himself small. "I will not stay long," she said. "Just until I can get work, maybe earn enough to get us to Oregon." Zachary nodded once. "You stay as long as you need. No pressure here." But something in his voice told her he did not mind them being there. They stayed. 1 week turned into 2. Ada helped in the kitchen, in the garden. She patched shirts, mended fence clothes, read to Clara by firelight. Eli learned to help feed the horses, watched Zachary closely as he worked. Zachary never hovered, never asked questions. But he was always near. When Clara had a coughing fit, he rode to the next town for medicine. When Eli wanted to learn to ride, Zachary taught him without a word of complaint. And when Ada came in from hanging laundry one evening, cheeks pink from the wind, Zachary handed her a mug of coffee without looking up. "You do not have to take care of us," she said softly. I know, he said. But I want to. She did not know what to say to that. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Ada found Zachary on the porch, smoking in the cool dark. Do you want us to leave? She asked. He turned to her, startled. No, then why have you not asked us to stay? He looked down at the cigarette in his fingers, then back at her. Because I figured you needed time. You have been through more than most. Ada stepped closer. So have you? He gave a small nod. They stood side by side, silence stretching between them like something that could either close or break. I do not know much about running a ranch, Ada murmured. You know how to survive, he said. That counts more. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Ada felt something steady under her feet. By the end of the month, Zachary built bunk beds for the children, moved them into the smaller room across the hall. He did not say it out loud, but it felt permanent. One cold morning, Ada found a folded slip of paper by her plate. Inside, in Zachary's careful print, it read, You are not just guests anymore. You are family now. I want to give you my name, if you will have it. She stared at the words, heart thudding. Later that night, she stepped out to the barn where he was brushing down the gelding. You want to give us your name? She asked, voice shaking. He turned to her, face open. I do. Why? Zachary stepped closer, hands at his sides. Because I love you. I love them. And I want to build something with you. Not out of pity. Out of choice. Ada blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. I love you too, she whispered. Zachary stepped forward, careful, and wrapped his arms around her. She pressed her face to his chest, and for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Behind them, through the window, the children watched with wide eyes and smiles. They were not alone anymore. They had a home. They had a name. The first snow came early that year, settling soft and pale over the high prairie grass and the low rooflines of the ranch buildings. By morning, the corral fence wore a white cap, and icicles hung in neat rows from the eaves. Ada stood at the kitchen window, sleeves rolled, her hands red from the cold water in the basin. Behind her, Clara and Eli sat at the table, working slowly through their porridge, steam curling from their bowls. Zachary came in without knocking, stomping snow from his boots. He carried a small pail of milk and a wrapped parcel under his arm. Town's quiet, he said, setting the parcel on the table. But the general store's got a new shipment in. Thought you might want to try your hand at this. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small sack of dried apples and a tin of cinnamon. Ada turned from the sink, brushing damp strands from her cheek. You think I can bake something with that? I think you can do damn near anything if you decide to. She smiled without meaning to, then looked away. Eli reached for the tin, curious. What's that smell? Spice, Zachary said. Back east, folks put it in pies. Clara's eyes lit up. We could make one? Let's see if your sister feels up to it, Zachary said, his voice gentle. That afternoon, the stove stayed warm long after the fire settled low. Ada worked silent and focused, sleeves dusted in flour, cheeks flushed from the heat. Clara stood on an overturned crate beside her, careful as she helped peel the apples. Eli cleaned the kitchen knife after each use with the pride of a boy given a task to own. Zachary watched from the doorway, arms crossed against the cold in the hall. He didn't speak, just stayed until the crust was pinched and the pie set to bake. Later, when the scent of cinnamon filled the house, he cleared his throat. There's a man I know, retired Army. Keeps bees now, few miles north. Said next spring he might have a hive to spare. Thought we could try keeping one. Ada looked up, a little surprised. You want to keep bees? Well, he said, brushing the back of his neck. Seems like a thing families do. Thought maybe we'd try some honey next season. She didn't answer right away, just held his gaze longer than usual. Then she nodded once. That night, after the children were asleep, Ada stepped out onto the porch with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Zachary sat on the top stair, lantern low beside him, the horses barely visible in the dark beyond the barn. She eased down beside him, her voice quiet. "I never thought I'd be here." He didn't look over, just nodded once. "Some days I still wake up thinking we're on the trail. That Paul be up first, poking the fire." Zachary reached for her hand but didn't take it until she let him. Her fingers were cold, but he held them anyway. "I was supposed to marry a man back in Missouri," she said, surprising herself with the admission. "Before the sickness came. He was a carpenter. Kind but soft. He wouldn't have lasted out here." Zachary studied the dark horizon before speaking. "You don't have to explain anything to me. I'm not," she said, then added after a pause. "I just want you to know I didn't come here empty." He turned then, just enough for her to see his face. "Neither did I." They sat like that for a long time, their breath visible in the lamplight, hands clasped between them. The next morning, Ada rose before the others. She pulled on her boots, tied her scarf, and stepped into the quiet stillness of the yard. The snow had stopped, but the air was sharp. She crossed to the barn, where Zachary was already saddling the gelding. "I want to help with the calves today," she said, voice clear. He didn't argue. Just handed her a pair of gloves and nodded toward the stalls. By mid-morning, they had cleared the hay, checked the water trough, and moved 2 of the younger calves into the south pen. Ada worked without complaint, her movements growing more sure with each task. Zachary paused at the gate, watching her. "You're not trying to prove anything, are you?" She leaned on the fence post, chewing a bit of straw. "If I was, would you stop me?" "No," he said. "I'd just stand close in case you slipped." She laughed then, a quick, surprised sound that startled a magpie from the roof. That night, Eli brought in a cracked horseshoe he'd found by the well. "We could hang it over the door," he said. "For luck." Ada looked to Zachary, who gave her a small shrug. "Seems like we make our own luck," she said, taking the horseshoe and setting it on the mantel instead. Clara reached up, touching the cool iron. "Can we stay here forever?" Ada crouched beside her sister, brushing a bit of hay from her sleeve. "That's the plan." Zachary didn't say anything, but when Ada rose, he met her eyes, and there was no doubt between them. They weren't guests anymore. They were home. By late January, the wind had turned sharper, and the snow along the fence lines had crusted over with ice, cracking underfoot like thin glass. Inside the house, the air stayed close and warm, the stove kept stoked with cottonwood Zachary had split weeks earlier. The walls no longer echoed with silence, they held voices now. Eli's questions, Clara's humming, Ada's quiet singing when she thought no one was near. Zachary had started building a chicken coop near the shed, hammering through the cold with his collar turned up. Ada stood nearby with a bundled Clara at her side, offering measurements while Eli held boards in place. They worked without hurry, the kind of pace born from knowing there was no one to impress and nowhere else to be. "You ever raise hens?" Zachary asked as he adjusted the crossbeam. "No," Ada answered, brushing snow from the hem of her skirt. "But I've read about it. Ma used to say eggs were better than gold when you had children to feed." Zachary squinted toward the horizon. "A neighbor's got 2 broodies he's willing to trade come spring. I told him we'd be ready." Clara tugged at Ada's coat. "Will they have names?" "Only if you promise not to cry when one ends up in a stew pot," Ada said, lifting her gently onto a stump. "I won't," Clara said quickly, though her voice wavered. Zachary leaned the hammer against the post. "We'll keep the friendliest too. Rest are for eggs and Sunday dinners." That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Ada stayed by the hearth, threading a length of blue calico through her needle. She was mending the hem of one of her old dresses, one she hadn't worn since before the trail. The fabric had faded at the collar, but the seams were still strong. Zachary came in from the barn with snow on his coat and a thin bleeding scratch on the back of his hand. "What happened?" she asked, setting the fabric aside. "Fence wire," he said, brushing it off. "Nothing deep." "Sit," she said, already moving toward the cupboard for the salve. He obeyed, lowering onto the stool near the fire. Ada knelt beside him, her fingers steady as she cleaned the wound. "You always let people help you this easy?" she asked, not looking up. "No," he said. "But you're not people. You're you." She pressed the cloth against his skin a little harder than necessary. "You say things like that often?" He shifted under her touch, but not away. "Not before you." She sat back on her heels, the salve still in her hand. "You ever think about what happens after spring?" He met her eyes. "Every day. And I want to build a home that doesn't go quiet when the sun sets. I want to see Eli take over haying one day. I want Clara to have a pony she names something ridiculous. And I want you beside me through all of it." Ada didn't speak for a long while. Then she stood and reached for the dress she'd been mending. "I was fixing this to wear to town," she said. "Thought maybe we could all go in together for supplies. I never got to walk through a store with someone who wanted to be seen with me." "I'll take you," Zachary said. "Not because I want to be seen, but because you're mine." She folded the dress over her arm. "Then you'd best find a good razor. You look like a trapper." He laughed then, low and rough, and it pulled something warm from her chest. The next morning, Eli tightened the cinch on the gelding while Zachary hitched the sleigh. Clara clutched her mittens, bouncing on her toes. "Can we get peppermint sticks?" she asked. "1," Ada said. "2," Zachary countered. "It's a special day." The road to town was packed white, the trees along the ridge heavy with frost. Ada sat beside Zachary on the sleigh bench, her skirt tucked beneath her, the mended dress beneath her coat. She didn't speak much, but her hand brushed his once, and he didn't pull away. At the mercantile, they gathered flour, oats, and lamp oil. Eli studied the seed catalog near the counter while Clara pressed her nose to the glass jar of licorice. Ada spoke to the storekeep about a bolt of muslin, her voice even, her shoulders straight. Zachary watched her from across the room, his spine relaxing in a way it hadn't in years. When she turned and caught him looking, she didn't flinch or look away. On the ride home, Clara fell asleep against Ada's side. Eli leaned back beside the sacks in the rear, his boots covered with flour dust. Zachary reached for Ada's hand without speaking. She let him take it. The wind was quiet that afternoon, and the sky stretched wide over the land that was now, unmistakably, theirs. The last of the snow thinned by late March, pulling back from the fence posts and bearing the sod beneath in uneven patches of brown and green. Meltwater ran shallow in the ditches, and the air held the faint, stubborn scent of thawing earth. Zachary had begun walking the pasture lines again, checking for winter damage. Eli followed close these days, growing into his limbs with the boy's restless pride. One morning, Ada woke to find Clara nestled beside her, hair damp from a dream. The child's breathing was even, but her little hand still clutched the hem of Ada's nightdress. She eased away gently, tucking the quilt high beneath her sister's chin. Downstairs, light filtered through the lace curtain Zachary had hung above the sink weeks earlier. He stood at the table with his sleeves rolled, flattening a sheet of paper beside his coffee. "What's that?" Ada asked, tying her hair back with a scrap of ribbon. He looked up and gestured her over. "County Land Survey. There's a parcel east of the ridge flat with good drainage. Thinking of planting oats this year, alongside the hay." She studied the map, her brow drawn. "You'll need someone steady on the plow. I was hoping you'd drive the team." Ada blinked, then stepped closer. "You trust me with that?" "I trust you with the hard things," he said. "And there's no easy way to break new ground." That afternoon, they rode out together. The land he'd marked stretched wide and open, bordered on the far side by a low rise and clusters of chokecherry trees. The soil, when Ada knelt to touch it, crumbled loose between her fingers. "He said oats," she murmured, brushing her palm clean. "But I think we could try flax along the edges. It's lighter on the soil. And we'd get linen from it, too." Zachary watched her a moment, then nodded. "We'll need to trade for seed. Then we'll trade." They spent the rest of the day clearing brush, working side by side without much talk. The sun burned the last of the frost from the tree limbs, and a pair of meadowlarks called from the fence line. Zachary's hands were raw by dusk, but his eyes stayed steady on Ada's as she wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve. "You still thinking of Oregon?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. "Not lately." The walk home was slow. Eli ran ahead to open the gate, and Clara waved from the porch, her cheeks pink from playing. Ada's heart ached a little at the sight, not from sadness, but from how far they'd come from that roadside. That night, she stood by the cedar chest in the bedroom, folding away the last of what her mother had sewn back in Kansas before the sickness. The fabric was worn, the stitching uneven in places. She pressed her fingers to the seams. Zachary stepped in behind her, barefoot and quiet. "You all right?" She set the dress aside and turned. "I've been thinking of asking the preacher to come by." "Not now, but soon." He didn't move, just met her eyes with the same quiet certainty he'd given her the day she first stepped off his horse. "I'd stand with you," he said. "Whenever you ask." She reached for his hand and brought it to rest against her waist. "I never wanted anyone to carry me." "You're not being carried," he said. "You're being walked beside." They didn't speak again that night, but when he kissed her, it was with the care of someone who had waited long enough to mean it. By the end of April, the flax had taken root at the far edge of the new field, pale green shoots rising in neat rows. The chickens had begun laying their clucks, now part of the morning rhythm, and Clara named 2 of them without asking permission. Eli had taken to carving little wooden figurines, leaving them on windowsills and fence posts where Ada would find them and pocket them without a word. On a Sunday morning, sunlight broke clean through the kitchen window as Ada buttoned the back of her dress. It was pale lavender, made from the muslin she'd chosen in town weeks before. Zachary stood behind her, adjusting the collar of his shirt. "Did you ever think we'd have a day like this?" she asked. "No," he answered honestly. "But I hoped." They stepped outside together, and the children followed, dressed in their best. The preacher waited by the cottonwood tree near the creek, Bible in hand, hat tucked under one arm. There were no guests, no music, no fanfare. Just the wind moving gently through the grass, the scent of turned earth, and the quiet sound of Eli's boots shifting in the soil as he held Clara's hand. When it was done, Zachary kissed her once, brief but sure, and the preacher nodded, satisfied. They signed the ledger on the porch, and Ada set her name down beside Zachary's without hesitation. Later, after Clara had fallen asleep with her arms wrapped around her new hen-shaped doll and Eli had gone off to check the barn locks, Ada stepped out barefoot onto the porch. Zachary was already there, leaning on the railing, his wedding ring catching the moonlight. "You didn't say much today," she said. "I figured I'd spent the last 6 months showing you." She slid her hand into his. "You did." Behind them, the house stood solid in the spring, dark, warm, and lived in. No longer a place they were passing through. It was theirs now. And they were each other's. Fully. Finally. Without doubt. By late May, the wind had changed, not the sharp, biting gusts of winter, but something softer, full of dust and wild bees and the sweetness of new grass. The flax bloomed pale blue across the east field, each blossom catching the light like a secret. Ada stood at the edge of the rows one morning, her hands resting on her belly, the hem of her apron damp with dew. She wasn't showing yet, but she knew. Deep and quiet, the way she'd known when her mother first placed Clara in her arms and said, "You're the one she'll follow." Zachary came up behind her, his boots muffled by the soft ground. He didn't say anything until she turned. "I thought you might be out here," he said, brushing a speck of chaff from his sleeve. "You feeling all right this morning?" "I'm fine," she said, then added, "Just needed to see it again. All this we made." He looked toward the field, then back at her. "It's growing strong." "So am I," she said, and took his hand, laying it gently against her stomach. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then his fingers curled carefully around hers. "We'll need more hands by harvest," he said, voice low. "And I'll build another room off the kitchen, so you don't have to carry up and downstairs come winter." She nodded once. "I'd like that. A place where the baby can hear us laughing." That evening, Ada brought the ledger down from the shelf beside the hearth. She stood by the table, inkwell open, the oil lamp flickering. Zachary looked up from the sharpening stone in his lap. "What are you writing?" "I've been keeping a list," she said. "Things we'll need before the baby comes. Cloth, mostly. I want to sew by hand, not by." He set the knife aside and came to stand behind her, reading over her shoulder. "We'll see to every one of those," he said. "And you add anything more you think of." She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I want to write your name again, on the inside of the baby's first shirt." "Then you do it," he said. "That child's as much yours as mine. And it'll grow up knowing what strength looks like." The weeks passed without hurry. Eli took to riding out early to check the creek crossings, coming back with his boots soaked and his jaw set firm. Clara spent her mornings in the shade behind the barn, tending to a patch of wild mint she called her garden. Zachary carved a cradle from pine, smoothing each edge until it shone. He didn't talk while he worked, but Ada noticed how often he ran his hand along the curve of the wood, like he was already seeing it full. Come July, the flax stood waist high, and the oats waved gold across the north end of the property. One afternoon, while Ada stitched seams beneath the window, Zachary came in carrying a folded paper. "Got a letter from the neighbor west of us," he said, handing it to her. "Wants to trade us a bull calf for help with his barn roof." She unfolded the note, scanning the rough script. "He's got a young widow living with him. Says she's kin." Zachary nodded. "His sister-in-law. Lost her husband in the same blizzard that took their heifer herd. She's teaching his girls to read." Ada set the paper down. "We'll help. And I'll send her some of Clara's outgrown dresses, if she wants them." That Sunday, they hitched the wagon and rode west, the children bouncing in back with a sack of early apples and fresh biscuits. The neighbor's place was warm but clean, two girls playing on the porch steps with a rag doll between them. The widow, a quiet woman with calloused hands and ink under her fingernails, nodded once when Ada offered the dresses. "They'll be grateful," she said. "And so am I." Zachary climbed onto the roof without a word, and Eli handed up nails with careful pride. Clara sat beside the girls, watching as they showed her how to braid the doll's yarn hair. On the way home, Ada leaned against Zachary, her head resting against his shoulder. The wagon creaked beneath them, the wheels catching dry clumps of earth. "You ever think about how it might have gone different?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "I used to. Not anymore." "Why not?" "Because I wouldn't trade a single day of this. Not for a softer life. Not for a shorter road. Not even for the quiet before I found you." She turned her face into his coat, and he kissed the top of her head. When the baby came in early November, the first snow had only just dusted the porch rails. Ada labored through the night, her breath sharp, her hands clenched around Zachary's. The midwife came from the neighbor's place, her sleeves rolled, and her voice calm. Eli waited out in the barn, pacing, while Clara slept curled in the cradle Zachary had built. Just before sunrise, a girl was born, her lungs strong, her cry loud enough to startle the hens. Later, when the house was still and the fire low, Ada held her daughter to her chest and looked at Zachary. "She's got your chin," he said, brushing the child's cheek. "She's got your eyes," Ada whispered. "And all our hope." He kissed her then, not careful or uncertain, but full and sure. And she kissed him back, her free hand at the back of his neck, holding fast. They named her Ruth, after Zachary's mother. That winter was long but full. Ruth grew strong. Clara learned to read aloud without stumbling. Eli outgrew his boots and started shaving the fuzz from his chin with one of Zachary's old razors. Ada kept sewing, her fingers always busy, her voice softer now when she sang near the cradle. Zachary built a smokehouse and taught Eli to cure meat. They harvested enough to trade, enough to keep. One evening, as the wind howled low and the lanterns cast long shadows across the floor, Ada sat beside the hearth, mending a torn sleeve. Zachary stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We've done all right," he said. "We've done more than that," she answered. He knelt beside her, his forehead pressed to hers, the firelight flickering between them. Ruth stirred in her basket, and Clara, half asleep on the rug, reached for her hand. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, it was warm, and the house was full, and the love between them no longer needed to be spoken to be known.